So good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Samantha Hocking and I'm a clinical academic endocrinologist from Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney and the University of Sydney. And I'm here to welcome you to what I think is one of the most important sessions actually of this Congress, which is entitled Power to the Patient's Lived Experience of Obesity and its Potential to Inform, Increase and Improve Provision of Bariatric Metabolic Surgery. So I'm here with two moderators, Dr. Alex Craven, who I'll ask to introduce himself to you now.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a local surgeon from here in Melbourne, as I agree with Sam. I think this is a conversation that we don't have often enough, and there are people in the room that we don't have on the stage often enough at medical and surgical conferences, and that is the people who we attempt to help in our work on a day-to-day basis. And I've recently had the experience of hearing from and engaging with a number of the speakers today and seeing the real practical value hearing from people who have walked the journey has for us as clinicians. And so it's a real privilege to be offering this session, so I certainly hope you enjoy it. I suspect at some stage we will be joined by Dr. Kelvin Heger, who is a surgeon from the USA, an ex-president of the ASMBS, and I had the privilege of visiting his practice last year, and it is an incredibly impressive high-quality, multidisciplinary service that he runs. I suspect, being an ex-president of the ASMBS and sort of one of the big guns, he is probably in about 4 sessions at once and running around trying to join us now. So I suspect he'll come up and we'll welcome him when he does.
So we now have, moving on to a different tack, and when I was speaking with Alex about this session, we were really talking about just the power of the patient as an advocate. And I'm an endocrinologist, and it really made me think about JDRF. And I'm really, really pleased that Suzanne Kolf from JDRF accepted our invitation to come to speak. So Suzanne is the head of government relations and advocacy at JDRF, and her role there is to steer the strategy of volunteer engagement between people with type 1 diabetes and political decision makers. And they have had a great deal of success with significant government investment in type 1 diabetes policies and programs. Prior to being at JDRF, which she's been for about a decade, she's worked for change.org, for unions, for federal and state government, so she's a very well-informed person. And Suzanne's bio says that she enjoys giving people the tools they need to make their voice heard and seeing this result in tangible impacts. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation, Suzanne, and I think we're going to hear about some really positive ways we can use the power of the patient voice for change. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sam. Okay, so as Sam has already indicated, I'm Suzanne Kolf from JDRF, and I lead our government engagement strategy with government. So I'll click here, right.
The big button.
I'm smooth as silk.
This one. That way.
Yep,
and
great. Okay, fantastic. I just wanted to add that I didn't have any potential conflicts of interest to report, so just get that out of the road. But I thought I might just do a really quick little skip through what is type 1 diabetes and who is JDRF, just to go really swiftly through. So type 1 diabetes is a chronic autoimmune condition that can develop at any age. There is nothing anyone can do to prevent type 1 diabetes, and right now there's no known cure. JDRF was founded by mums in the 70s who wanted not just better treatment for type 1 diabetes, they wanted a cure. What began as a dream in family homes across the world has grown into a global organisation dedicated to ending type 1 diabetes by making type 1 diabetes research possible. So now we're the leading supporter of type 1 diabetes research in the world, but I'm here today to talk to you about our advocates, and that's volunteers with lived experience and how they're fundamental to achieving this impact. Okay, so what do we want? Well, JDRF is really unusual because everyone from the youngest 4-year-old advocate to the oldest 80-year-old supporter wants the same thing. We all want to find a cure. And until we do that, we want to make every day safer and easier than the day before. So that's a pretty simple mantra that everybody agrees on, which helps. And I put a little picture up there of George, who is one of our advocates in Tasmania, and he wrote this message to politicians when he was 6, which was, I'll just read it out to you because it's a bit hard to see. I would like scientists to find a cure for type 1 diabetes. I don't care what the ingredients are. Please, can you find a cure? From George. So, you know, very compelling. So, how do we get it? And the answer is advocacy. We use advocacy to engage with political decision makers for support for policies and programs that will impact people with type 1 diabetes. Our advocates are people with lived experience of type 1 diabetes, and our advocates have achieved funding over a decade for a range of policies and programs, including the Type 1 Diabetes Clinical Research Network and subsidised access to a range of devices that help people manage their type 1 diabetes. They've achieved millions of dollars in type 1 diabetes investment. So how do they do it? The photos might give you a hint. Sorry.
Can we have the next slide, thanks?
Here we go. JDRF's advocacy framework. We've got a framework that we rely upon, which has 4 pillars: policy, politics, persuasion, and project management, all the Ps. Policy is what we want and why. Politics, how can we provide it and how. Persuasion, how do we get our targets to deliver? And project management, which is how do we manage for success. So I'll just go into a little bit about the first 3 Ps. Just having a bit of... Here we go. Policy. So the first step is to work out what is your policy, like what do you want? Agree and be clear on your ask. You have to know what you want and why you want it. And you have to know who's your target. You have to know who you're asking and why you're asking them. You need to cost your policy. In our terms, we needed to work out the health economics in terms of savings to the individual and the healthcare system in relation to the research that we're investing in, the technology that we were chasing down, and we need to define the benefits and impacts of the ask. How would the policy benefit the individual? You need to put it in absolutely compelling terms that any advocate can go and talk to their politician about. And importantly, we have to get everybody singing from the same song sheet, because as with anything, there's a whole range of issues that people could campaign on, but to be effective, you've got to settle on one particular thing. And what we're campaigning for at the moment is we're seeking $50 million from the Australian government for the next stage of research funding for the Clinical Research Network. It's called CRN4. And our message is, over the past decade, funding for JDRF CRN has achieved a lot, but there's more to do and we need funding to help us get there. Okay, politics. Next up, politics. So you need to map your targets. In our case, it's federal government. So that is 152 MPs in the House of Reps and 76 senators in the Senate. And then you need to find within those MPs and senators your natural supporters. You need to find out who, in our case, has got type 1 diabetes and has it in their family, who are the doctors in Parliament, who are the parliamentary friends of diabetes. You need to be bipartisan. That is my absolute one takeaway from the day. It's so important. A day, a week, a year is a long time in politics. As you can see from the picture here, Scott Morrison could be the Prime Minister in Parliament announcing expanded access to diabetes technologies at a cost of $278 million. Fantastic commitment. But then change of government and it's Labor's Mark Butler who can be the Health Minister delivering on the promise, which is both of those both of those occasions we celebrated. You need to target the decision makers for your ask, and it's always good to start with the Health Minister, the Treasurer and Finance, so the Health Minister and the people who hold the purse strings. And you need to match key politicians with a family from their electorate. And you need to provide opportunity to say thank you. And if I was describing JDRF's secret sauce, it really is we work 2 election cycles. And if you think about an election cycle being perhaps 4 years, we spend 3 years talking to politicians and saying thank you, providing photo ops, talking to them, just saying we're so incredibly grateful for the support that you've given people with type 1 diabetes. And then in the final year, which is where we are now, just before an election, we go really hard with our ask. Then the next one, which is the fun bit, is persuasion. You need to build up a volunteer network of advocates, or that's what works for us, and we aim to have 80% of the 152 federal seats with a match between an advocate and an MP, and 40% of senators. You need to match your family to the target and try to find a family in the electorate for the politician you're trying to engage with. And this is another absolute takeout. Lived experience rules. Advocates are the experts. People like me just provide the tools to help advocates to make an impact. And I absolutely think that's 100% the most important thing I say today. Always start, I tell our advocates to always start an advocate meeting with a story about why the issue matters to them, and that they're a constituent and they vote, so their MP will want to hear from them. I also tell them that they bring a lot of votes with them, and that people with type 1 diabetes are single issue voters. I don't know if they are, but politicians believe it when you tell them. And they bring, grandparents and parents and brothers and sisters along with them for whoever has the best policy on our particular issue. You need to make sure everyone's on the same message, so a united message goes to MPs. You want to create an experience whereby MPs are sitting around in the committee rooms and someone says, type 1 diabetes is a big issue in our electorate, and someone else goes, yeah, and mine, and someone else goes, yeah, I just saw someone talking about that too. So that's the environment that we're kind of trying to build. You need to brief and debrief with advocates, so you need to make sure they're on the same page, and then when they've had the meeting, you need to debrief and find out what the politicians have in their minds, what the misconceptions are, all of those sorts of things. You need to remember to build relationships. No, you need to remember that building relationships with MPs takes time. Some of our advocates have known their politicians for years and years. And you need to be positive, respectful, and clear on what you're seeking. And you need to say thank you always. Okay, so, takeouts. JDRF started really small, but JDRF advocates are the centre of every government-funded policy or program we've achieved, like every single one. We see our research through the lens of patient impact. We're not interested in research unless it impacts patients or can be translated to patients. And our advocates have fought for research funding and policies that make a real difference to their lives. Our advocacy starts with people with lived experience telling their stories to political decision makers, and the strength of our advocacy comes from relationships built over time. Policy, politics and persuasion, and of course project management, which is important but I don't go into here, can work. And I just wanted to really leave you with 3 stories from advocates. Shanna, who's in this picture here, she's the young woman with the blonde hair. She's in the electorate of Hindmarsh, and she's had an enduring relationship with her MP. She's been an advocate since she was 12 years old, and her advocate is Mark Butler, who's now the Health Minister. And it's just, the access that Shanna gets is amazing because she has a really wonderful relationship that's built on many, many years. When she was 12, she got the minister, he was then a backbencher, to write to me to say, could she come to Canberra to join a contingent of kids that we were having in Canberra? And of course, she came and hosted the event at 12. So that's Shanna. Georgia is another advocate. She's 13. she was, we brought her along to a meeting of clinicians and researchers and funders. It was quite a tense meeting. It was about, we'd received a tranche of research funding, and everyone was, very bristling and thinking that they should have the funding and why did we have it, and it was just quite a difficult meeting. And she came, she was 13, she came in a school uniform, she was absolutely shaking like a leaf, and she got up and she said, right, I went and spoke to my MP. People like me went and spoke to their MPs all around the country, and they listened, and we got the money, and now we want to see results. And it was just absolutely mind-blowing, and it totally changed the dynamic of the day. Like, I can tell you, all those clinicians and researchers were having flow charts with stick figures of Georgia in the middle and things coming out from that, so it was amazing. And the final story I just wanted to tell you was from Zach, who's 7, and he used to go to these meetings which were called community cabinets, which the Labor Party used to go and meet, local communities all around the place and take their cabinet with them. And he was at one of these meetings, and he had a meeting with the then treasurer, was Wayne Swan. And Wayne Swan said to him, "Oh, Zach, every time I come to these meetings, I look up and I see kids in blue T-shirts, people in blue T-shirts, JDRF in blue T-shirts, like everywhere I go. It's just, you're everywhere." And he sounded very tired. And Zach said, "That's because, Mr. Treasurer, we never get a day off from type 1. And it will always stick with me. It was quite amazing. So I'll leave you with a final word. Try to.
Sorry.
No, come on. Yeah, here we go. And this is Laura and her baby Ivy, and they're in the electorate of Hughes. Laura actually works at JDRF on an insulin pump program that we have, and she just had her first baby Ivy. So she and all the advocates like her know how important it is to say thank you. So I say thank you to you for listening to me today.
Thanks, Suzanne. That was an incredible presentation. And if everyone here isn't convinced by the power of the patient voice, I think they now are, having heard that presentation and the millions and millions of dollars of funding that JDRF has attracted. But it's hard work. It needs to be done in a coordinated way, but it's just so powerful. So I'm going to ask our third speaker to come up, and I should have said earlier, we are going to have a panel of questions at the end. So sorry, I'm motoring through all the presentations. There will be time, so hold those questions. So now I'm going to introduce Damien Werner, or Damo. So as we've already heard, he's the co-founder of Bariatric Support Australia, an organisation that provides support for people undergoing weight loss surgery. And after his own personal experience, together with his sister Tash, saw this need for better aftercare, and so they started BSA, Bariatric Support Australia, and what began as a small Facebook group with about 10,000 members has now grown into a community of over 100,000 across varying social media channels. So Damo, I'm going to invite you up to the stage, and you're going to be talking to us about transforming lives through shared experience, how the patient voice can increase uptake of bariatric surgery. Thanks very much.
So the past few months, it's been busier than I had ever dreamed possible. Both our parents have been in hospital for very different reasons. One with bone marrow failure and starting chemo, the other arriving home from a few months away and having a massive heart attack and needing quadruple bypass. And that was just 2 weeks ago. I have the pleasure of having both my parents live with my wife and I, and even though they are separated, so it is a challenge at times, but we really wouldn't have it any other way. The other day I was reflecting on just what's been going on, and I found a little bag of some photos and cards and different things. And I found this. My very first Weight Watchers membership book. I was 8. I was 32 kilos. I had fallen on one of my bullies who was beating me up at school, and he came to school the next day with his arm in a sling, saying that Dama's fat ass landed on him and he sprained his wrist. That created a foundation for what would be the next 35 years. What it did teach me, though, and I didn't know this at the time, I was just a kid, but it also made me realise the importance of building a sense of community in people where they are safe. Growing up, I was always the inquisitive type. I'd try to work out why things worked, how they worked. It led to a lot of broken toys. If it had screws and could be soldered, I'd done that. Me with my very first pair of headphones. And I wasn't much bigger than that when I first went to Weight Watchers. I don't know if any of you guys have experience with that, but at Weight Watchers they used to have a thing called the pig pen. And if you hadn't lost any weight that week, or if you'd gained any, you would stand in the pig pen and the rest of the people would wink at you. My natural curiosity evolved over time, and I always loved science. I loved, working things out, doing all that sort of stuff. But as I got older, my weight increased, and I would love to say that I had some hero at school that came in and would protect me. Tash did, my sister did, but there was an age gap, so there was definitely time when she wasn't at school and I was. This was just before Kim and I got engaged 17 years ago. It's actually our 16th wedding anniversary today. So. What better way to spend it than talking about something that, but it's okay. The only conflict that I have is whether to have a Long Island iced tea or a whiskey old fashioned, but we'll worry about that later. About 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And within about a year, I was on insulin. As my weight increased, so did my insulin levels, until I was on 350 units of insulin a day, and my HbA1c was still out of control at over 14. My endocrinologist, she'd been wonderful, but she sat there and told me that the way I was going, I had about 5 years to live. She said that I needed weight loss surgery. I thought, cool, can you refer me to weight loss surgery? And she said, no, we don't have funding for that. I was on Centrelink, I'd had a car accident, I had ruptured discs and all sorts of stuff in my back. And somehow, my amazing wife started crocheting blankets to sell blankets so that we could cover the cost of the private health insurance. And then we would take out our advance payments from Centrelink and save them so that we could pay for the surgeon. It was during this time that I began researching types of surgeries, surgeons, most importantly the costs, because for me that did matter. I knew there were fantastic surgeons with a lot of experience, but I couldn't afford that. I found an amazing general surgeon in my area, and he did a wonderful job. He did an amazing tummy tuck, which was even better. But doing that research, I'd get sent these cool little info packs that the surgeons would do up. And, I even had one pack that arrived and it had lollies in it. Like, this is cool, But it really felt like a sales pitch. And for anyone that is living in a bigger body, living with obesity, we have been offered every pill, potion and program known to man, from starting Weight Watchers at a young age to being a lifetime member of Jenny Craig. I'd done the shake diets, Atkins diet, soup diets, a blood type diet called Sure Slim, and even now the thought of flax seeds. Ugh. It's like 100 grams of flax seeds a day. Like, ugh. And that's why I didn't lose anything, apparently, because I didn't eat enough flax seeds. There were these tablets that my grandmother had bought off one of those late night infomercial things. They supposedly tasted like caramel, and she got them and realised she couldn't have them because they had dairy in them. So she gave them to me because she thought, you need to lose weight as well. And just chuck them in the bin. Anyway, I tried meditation, tried going to the gym, I tried screaming at my fat to go away, even had a faith healer who tried to cast the spirit of gluttony out of me. But what I really wanted was for something that had proven results. What I really wanted was to hear from my fellow Aussies about what actually worked for them. I went on to have the sleeve and I lost over 100 kilos. I've maintained 117 kilos for nearly 8 years. What I discovered on my journey was that at the time and where I lived, there were very few allied health professionals that knew anything about bariatric surgery. My first dietitian I went to sat there on Google at the same site that I'd been looking on and started printing information off and then started crossing it out because she didn't agree with that and didn't agree with... So I didn't bother. I could Google it myself without paying $180 a visit to do it. The one thing that was available was social media. And over the next few years, I was able to admin a support group which had grown to around 11 or 12,000 members. The other thing that had happened was my sister had had revision to RNY. It wasn't long before Bariatric Support Australia was born. Tash agreed to come on a journey with me to change the face of bariatric support groups because we knew that a lot of the health professionals didn't like the support groups, and there are still some that don't like them. They can be toxic, they give out bad information, whatever it is. We still get that pushback. But what we set out to do was to change the face of support groups in this country. We knew the need for people to be able to access the right information, but we also knew the power in what we now call the lived experience. And I'm so grateful that for Alex And Sam, for having a lived experience session, it's so important. The main rule that we introduced as part of our Facebook support group was kindness. We see other groups with all sorts of rules. Don't need them if people are being kind. And what was evident, as I just said, a lot of doctors that didn't like it, we knew we needed to change that. We knew we needed to reach out to the surgeons, to the doctors, the dietitians, the psychologists, and everyone else. Exercise physiologists, so important, because it has to be a team thing. We would ask these allied health professionals to write blogs for us, and at first, a lot of them were concerned that they were going to lose business, but the opposite was true. What started happening was a bridge was being built, and some of those hidden mysteries were being revealed that, it's really not that scary. We're allowed to ask questions. The issue was that we didn't know what questions to ask. So, again, Tash and I started asking our community, what are the questions that you want to know? What are the things that you didn't know going into this? I didn't know that at 6 weeks it would feel like I'd lost my best friend, which was food. I suddenly had no coping mechanism, no psychologist, no help. I was on my own. We had to create a space where people could come and get that help, even if they couldn't afford it. And it may have only been the help from lived experience, but you know what? Sometimes it's great to be able to follow someone out of that hole that you're in just because they've been there before and they know the way out. We've now grown to over 62,000 members in our main group, with 50,000 active every month. We have a recipe group with 22,000, a reset with 3,000, a plastics group with 5,800, a fashion group with 5,600 members, buy, swap and sell group. My favourite, we just started GLP-1 group, which is really taking off. And my favourite is our dating group with 1,100 members. There are people that their relationships end and they end up wanting to, get back into the dating scene, but they might be self-conscious of all their excess skin that they can't afford to have removed. People that are walking that same path, they get it. We've actually had people that met on our dating group and are now married, and I love that. Just about out of time. Picture this, sitting in a doctor's clinic when two people just start discussing your weight and talking about what terrible parents you're going to make because you're so fat. Or walking to school pickup and a parent saying to their child, this is why you can't have Maccas. Or you get home from another failed job interview where you were told you were qualified for the role but not quite the right fit. And what they meant by fit was physical fit. That is something that happened. Tash had gone for her 90th job interview and been rejected for the 90th time. And she rang me, and I knew she was upset. And she said to me, I'm not going to go for another job interview until I've lost my weight. After losing 50 kilos, she was offered 4 jobs in 1 week. And I don't see that as a great achievement. I see the hypocrisy in that. I'm out of time, but I just want to finish. A well-run support group isn't something to be scared about. To be fair, it is the internet and people will be people. But what we ask is that you partner with us a couple of stories that I didn't get to do. Is that you partner with us to educate people, to support people. Because the more education that is out there, the better equipped and prepared the patients are going to be. Thank you.
So once again, Damo, thank you for your story and for your honesty. And I think your stories of the stigma that you have experienced in your life really made us all gasp. And I really want to apologise to you that you had to experience that through your life. And thank you for your resilience and your courage and your ability to move forward and help others. I think that's amazing. So thank you very much. Now, our final speaker in this session is Professor Francisco Rubino, who really does not need an introduction, but I will attempt to summarise your page-long bio. So he's the current chair of the Lancet Commission on Clinical Obesity and really was one of the really important people who did a lot of research in proving that bariatric surgery was such an effective treatment for diabetes and for obesity. But I'm not going to speak about you anymore. I'm going to let you speak because that's what's most important. And you're going to be talking on could medicalising obesity empower patients, clinicians and decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening everybody. I think I share with you this idea that we should apologize as a medical profession to the people with obesity, and I felt that deeply so much because I was myself holding some stereotyping views of people with obesity when I started my medical school and even when I finished my medical school. So medical school did nothing to me to teach me anything about obesity. When I was a resident in general surgery, I was looking for a future in cancer surgery or anything else. I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do, but one thing I knew for sure, I didn't want to do a bariatric surgery. I thought that people with obesity could do just that by themselves, that they, maybe were not considerate, they may be a little bit reckless, they could have avoided their problem. The same kind of things I hear everywhere. And that I think I was a perpetrator of, but I'm also a victim, because we are all, including people who suffer from obesity, victim of the same environment that tell us always the same story. And we end up believing it. So it turned out to change my mind because I was exposed and was lucky enough. I got exposed to biology and clinical evidence that told me otherwise, but a lot of my colleagues don't. And so I don't point my fingers to them because, unfortunately, we are all in this. And however, that doesn't mean the medical profession doesn't have responsibility for this, because on our watch, we let the stigma, stereotyping, stigma, discrimination grow and go unchallenged. And so for that reason, I thought it was my duty to try and remedy in part, whatever I could do. And I organized a few years ago, just before the pandemic, this international consensus conference on the stigma of obesity. We tried to get all the medical organizations involved. We got 100 of them to endorse this initiative, and we ended up publishing in a major journal like Nature Medicine this large position statement that reviewed all the evidence of harms that stigma causes, but also what are the causes that lead to stigma. We actually ended up putting out this pledge that, of course, besides stating the obvious that we should treat everybody with obesity with dignity and respect, I should go without saying, but it's so sad that we had to say it because that's not the case, and we just heard how many times that is the case. And we say that we need to do, in order to do that, to address stigma, we need to change the narrative around obesity. And so recently we just started to do some follow-up to that claim and to that pledge, and I will tell you a little bit of the results of this new initiative. The causes of weight stigma. I think if you want to address the problem, if you want to make people with obesity be treated more fairly, you need to understand why there is a problem like this. Because otherwise, obviously advocacy is important all the time, but if we don't understand exactly what is the cause of the problem, we might actually not achieve as much as we should and we could. And I think everything points to the fact that the stigma of obesity stems from this idea that growing more fat, rich adipose tissue is nothing else than a consequence of how much you eat, how much you exercise. Even though the biology tells us now a completely different story, but that's very much ingrained in everybody's mind. What we found with a study that we did a few years ago is called the ASK study. We tested measures of weight bias, and then we asked people some questions. And what we found was that there was a strong relationship between certain beliefs and stigma. In other words, if you ask people whether both healthcare professionals and general population alike, which is strange, healthcare professionals should know better, but they actually respond in the same way as everybody else. If you ask what is is it possible to reverse obesity by just voluntary decisions and lifestyle interventions, what we found is that those who actually believe that obesity is entirely reversible by lifestyle interventions, they had more stigma than the others, suggesting that in fact this idea of reversibility plays a role. It's not just what we think normally, the idea that people are responsible for gaining weight. I think we blame them people twice, also because we think they could do something to lose the weight and they are not doing so. This is a difference, in my opinion, that makes stigma of obesity so much more resilient than any other form of stigma, because even other forms of potentially lifestyle-related diseases, etc., like cancer, typical cancer that are associated with smoking, people forgive people for smoking, in a way. Somebody comes with lung cancer, the society accepts that nobody should pay for their surgery, right? The reason why we don't accept it for obesity is not only because we think that like people with cancer may have been smoking too much and got it, but it's because we think they could undo obesity as they wish, if they really wanted. And that's why we don't support. But is obesity really a volitional problem? And the biology, as I told you, is telling us a completely different story. The mechanisms, the centers that regulate appetite, satiety, and body weight in general are located in an area of the hypothalamus. Even just if you show this anatomical situation, the area that controls our body weight is located deep into the brain, in a place where voluntary control has nothing to do with. Because the cortex is far away from that level. And in fact, this area of the hypothalamus is typically involved in control of all the other biological functions that are not under control of voluntary decision, exactly for the reason that those functions are so vital that you don't want to have somebody dealing with it and messing up, perhaps. So temperature, controls of any other thing, body functions are in that area in the same way as the control of body weight. And then also there is more complexity in the system. As you know, the gut also plays a role, so we sense what we are eating, not just with our brain, but with our gut, and tell the brain what's coming in. So against this backdrop of a very complex biology, we have such a naive idea that we are completely in control of our body weight regulation. And in fact, when I speak with my patients and also with anybody else, I think I try to explain that body weight regulation is no different in any shape or form than control of your temperature or the blood cell mass or other things that are typically strongly biologically tight and regulated. And if you can understand that temperature is not under your control, maybe it's easier to understand that body weight isn't either. So to follow up that initiative that I told you before about the consensus conference, we said that we had to change the narrative and educate people. But the reality is we don't know which narrative is going to make an impact. Should we make people aware of the damages and on the individual, the stigma causes? Or should we make them aware of why body weight is not under your control? Which one of the messages is going to be more effective? So what we did, and this is a study that we are now completing at King's in London, we developed, we got a research grant, and we developed an animation that, by the way, I should thank the funders. It's Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson, both of them funded this completely an investigator-initiated study, etc. And so we created an animation that explains, this is just the final things, but the animation narrates the story in 6 minutes or less. The story of Emma. Emma is a person, just like other persons have just spoken to us has experience on their own skin the issue of stigma in school, bullied at school, doctors pointing the fingers there because she wasn't losing weight, their own family members with out of tough love telling them that they were not good enough, etc., etc. And so that is the part of the video that we call the empathy evoking video. At least we wish that it would evoke some empathy from. And then there is a second component of this video that explains biology. It explains exactly what I told you before, that weight is not under control and fat mass is not under control, etc. In a very simple way, so that we can speak to colleagues and healthcare providers and laymen people. I don't know if this is going to...
Weight stigma is associated with the belief that obesity is a personal choice and that people with obesity lack willpower. This belief assumes that body weight is under voluntary control and merely depends on energy in
it's not
minus energy
projecting,
out.
I don't know why,
Losing
but
weight should
it
therefore
was
be
only
easy.
to say that, don't worry,
eat less
it's only
and
to say
exercise more.
that...
Weight stigma is
oh, here it is.
associated with the belief
Yeah.
that obesity is a personal choice and that people with obesity lack willpower. This belief, however, assumes that body weight
science
is
shows
under
that these
voluntary
ideas
control
are inaccurate
and
and
merely
misleading.
depends on energy
Let's
in
explain why.
minus energy out. Losing weight should therefore
It's just to give you a sense of the fact that we're in a very... we can stop the... let me see. Can you advance the video so that it doesn't conflict with the audio? Yes. So what we did was, it was this very simple video. We tried to make it as simple as possible, explaining biology in the most effective way that we could. And then we did a survey, research survey on 1,500 individuals in both UK and United States. And we asked a few questions, some about beliefs around obesity and beliefs around attitudes towards treatments of obesity, etc. In those people, we also measured weight bias using validated scores. And then we exposed them to the video for 6 minutes, and then we repeated the test again to see if a very short exposure to education could make any impact on bias or beliefs around obesity, etc. And it's here just to show that what we did, we had this whole video, we had a group of people who saw the whole video with empathy and biology. And then we had two subgroups that only saw half of it. A group saw the biology animation video, and another one saw the empathy evoking, but not the biology. And then there was another group that had a control video that was unrelated to this, just to make sure that it's not just because people feel fatigued that they change their mind. So what happened is we found that there was bias associated with a number of beliefs. The study is a massive amount of data. We're still trying to make sense of it and publish soon. But I wanted to just share with you this interesting finding. If you look in red is the pre-exposure response of the audience. And when we asked if obesity is a personal choice, it's a lifestyle choice, right? Before the exposure to the video, significant majority did just pick that option. When we also looked at weight bias among those who responded in a certain way or another, we found that response was associated with the higher level of bias in a way that we would have probably predicted already. But interestingly enough, when people get exposure to this information, to this message, you can see that now they're starting thinking about, no, it's not exactly as simple as we assumed. And a lot of people start thinking, no, it's not a personal choice anymore. However, this is only happening when people see the biology video. The empathy evoking video really almost makes no change. So you might think maybe people have no empathy for, they're all psychopaths, but it's probably not the case. What may happen here is that a lot of people who are biased against obesity and people living with obesity don't do that necessarily because they're mean. They might think that that's exactly what it is, and also that they are doing some sort of, they're trying to help by coming. So it's even more difficult to address because for other type of stigma and problems of this type, it's very clear that there is some level of hate or anger or whatever that is an emotional drive that at some point it's negative, and you can actually make a campaign and advocate and say, look, this is not acceptable today. Somebody makes any discrimination on for any other reason, we can make the case that this is not acceptable. We might have laws that would say this is something you cannot do, but this is harder to address because the other people will be convinced that it's socially inappropriate to be biased against any other thing. Here, there may be a sense that it's okay to do so because I'm not doing anything. Actually, I'm trying to help in a way. And that's actually a reflection that we should have, because if you have that in mind, I think it's important not to expect that people will just react because we tell them this is unfair, this is unfair, this is unfair. They might push back with arguments that might seem logic to them, etc. So the other message is that explaining biology seems to have an effect. And in fact, I don't have here the slides to show you the whole data because it's unpublished yet, but I can anticipate that in fact, when people get exposed to this biological video, their level of bias drops, even with few minutes of exposure, versus it doesn't do so much when they're exposed to the empathy video. So there is a way to affect bias, and it's to create knowledge and improve knowledge about what, and it goes with what I said before, this idea that you can go in and out of obesity as you wish is perhaps the most important problem. There's many other lifestyle-related diseases, none of them gets this level of bias, and perhaps the reason is because when somebody breaks a leg because it's been reckless, whether doing extreme sports or driving fast and driving under the effect of alcohol or whatever else, at some point, if they break a leg, they break a leg, and you need to fix it, and everybody understands that they cannot fix it by themselves. If with obesity, people think, okay, you got it because you ate too much or did not exercise, and then perhaps you could do something about it, and you're not doing it. And so that's the very problem. I'm going to go fast because I'm already at the limit. So the other issue that I wanted to mention to you is the fact that we are responsible as medical professionals also because we have framed this problem of obesity in a way that is not representing reality, it's only a risk factor. And so when you make this problem a risk factor, nothing else, there is exactly that thing I was saying before, that you can go in and out of the problem by voluntary decisions. If it's instead a disease, that might not be possible anymore. So lung cancer is a disease. It's perceived to be such. So it doesn't matter if you smoke too much. At that point, you have a disease. So it's important for all stakeholders to improve understanding of obesity also as a disease. It can be a risk factor, it can be a disease. So we avoid a number of things, including quackery, the people who give very bad advice without knowledge. But we cannot do that by convincing people that obesity is a disease just by decree, by just saying it's a disease. We need to explain it. And that's because there's some evidence that obviously not everybody who has obesity has a disease. And that's something we should accept. One can live in a larger body and be healthy and happy. And it should be the same. And telling people that they have a disease is a big responsibility that we take as professionals. Because the moment you communicate that, you put a burden on that person. The fear of living enough to see their children growing and other things. We should never be it's easy to give this news when there is no evidence that there is disease. In fact, this is a bad news that somebody has to give only when there is accurate evidence. So it's not all of nothing, and this is what the Lancet Commission you just mentioned is trying to explain, and we will describe and we'll try to describe illness in the context of obesity as a very obvious objective situation of illness, but also admit that there are people who can live with obesity and have a preserved health. I think this is important in the same way as we also address bias if we want to change things, because otherwise we're not going to make progress. And I want to finish with this slide to say that with the Lancet Commission, we know for sure we're going to be under attack as soon as we publish, because there will be people who say, no, obesity is never a disease. You're trying to medicalize obesity. And I'm telling my colleagues that we should be proud of medicalizing obesity, because the reason why we are in this situation is because obesity has never been medicalized. If it were medicalized, people would be protected, the public would be protected, there would be regulations, there would be rules of evidence-based that would have to apply. We cannot see quackery every day. People saying all sort of things, or even insulting and discriminating because of an obesity. So medicalizing obesity should not have the derogatory sense that we're trying to increase profit for the medical profession or for the pharma companies or whatever, but it's just the right thing to do. Thanks.
So I'd like...
Please join us, Dr. Rubino.